So there's this really high-stakes trade conflict brewing between the United States and Canada. And, the auto industry is right in the crossfire. But this whole story about tariffs and assembly lines, it's not at all what it seems. It's way more complex and, honestly, a lot more surprising than you'd think.
Because what if I told you that in this whole fight, Canada isn't some helpless victim? What if, instead, it's actually holding the ultimate trump card? We're talking about a weapon so powerful it could bring the entire U.S. auto sector to its knees. Yeah, really. Let's break down exactly how.
All right, so here's the plan. We're going to unpack this in 5 parts. First up, we'll look at the borderless industry. Then, we'll get into the American tariff threat. After that, we'll uncover Canada's billion-dollar weapon. Then we'll see the corporate civil war this all kicks off. And finally, we'll look at the true cost of a trade war.
Okay, so to really get what's going on here, you have to understand something crucial. The US and Canadian auto industries, they're not two separate things. Not at all. They really function as one single, incredibly efficient manufacturing ecosystem, where that line on the map, it's almost meaningless.
I love this description I've heard. It's like a single organism that literally lives on both sides of the border. I mean, think about that. This isn't about separating two industries. It's like trying to split a living creature right down the middle. The whole system is built on what's called just-in-time logistics, which basically means parts show up exactly when they're needed, treating the two countries like one giant factory floor.
Okay, to see just how intertwined this is, just follow the journey of one single part, say a piston. It starts as raw aluminum mined in Quebec, Canada. Then it's shipped over to Ontario to be cast into a rough part, still in Canada. From there, it crosses the border into Michigan for some specialized finishing. Then, get this, it goes back across the border to Ontario to be assembled into an engine. And finally, that finished engine crosses the border a third time to be put into a car back in Michigan. I mean, one part, multiple border crossings, and this isn't some weird exception, this is the norm.
And this whole system didn't just happen by accident. It was a completely deliberate design. If you go back to the 1960s, Canada's auto industry was basically on life support. It was dying. So Canada put up tariffs to protect it, which led to something called the 1965 Auto Pact. And this deal created tariff-free trade, but with one absolutely brilliant condition. For every single car U.S. companies sold in Canada, it had to build one there too. That one rule, it triggered this huge wave of investment that not only saved Canada's industry, but created the super integrated system we have today.
All right, so now this system that's been working for over half a century is facing a massive direct threat. There's this new wave of American protectionism that's basically threatening to take a hammer to this whole partnership with the very clear goal of tearing it all down.
So the philosophy behind all this? It's called economic protectionism. And the core idea is actually pretty simple. You make imported stuff more expensive by slapping tariffs on it, which, in theory, forces companies to move production and jobs back home. The goal's been stated really clearly. Every car sold in the United States should be made in the United States. Period.
And look, this isn't some vague threat. The political rhetoric has thrown around the possibility of tariffs as high as 25, 50, or even a crippling 100% on cars built in Canada. The logic is just blunt. Make it so incredibly expensive to build in Canada that car companies have no choice but to pack up and move south.
So why such an aggressive stance? Well, from that protectionist point of view, it's all about this number. The U.S. has a massive $250 billion automotive trade deficit. That just means it imports way more in car value than it exports. And Canada is seen as a big piece of that deficit that can be clawed back.
Now for Canada, this isn't just some trade dispute. This is an existential threat. The auto industry is the second largest contributor to its entire economy. And its vulnerability? It's just profound. Why? Because pretty much 100% of its $60 billion in auto exports go to one single market, the United States. Unlike oil or lumber, there's no other customer to just pivot to. You can't just sell these cars somewhere else. They're built specifically for the integrated North American market.
So it really seems like an unwinnable situation for Canada, right? It looks like they're backed into a corner. But this is the turning point of our story. Because the American position completely ignores the other side of the economic equation, demand. And it's right there that we find Canada's secret weapon.
Okay, first, let's look at the number the U.S. is focused on. This is the value of cars and parts that Canada sells to them. This is the supply side of the equation, the stuff the U.S. thinks it can just replace by building it at home.
But that's only half the story. The other number, the much, much larger number, is this one, the value of cars and parts that Canada buys from the U.S.
And that difference, well, it doesn't just change the math. It changes absolutely everything.
And this is where we see the core of Canada's leverage, what some people are calling the boycott math. When you put these two numbers side by side, the takeaway is just undeniable. The U.S. auto industry needs Canadian buyers way more than it needs to get rid of Canadian suppliers. Canada is its single largest and most important customer on the entire planet.
I mean, to put this in perspective for you, Canadian purchasers aren't just a big piece of the pie. They represent nearly 2/3 of the entire global export market for the U.S. auto industry. This isn't just a pillar holding up their export strategy, it is their export strategy.
And this leverage gets even more powerful when you realize it hits the U.S. industry right where it makes its money. We're talking about those high-margin pickup trucks, the Ford F-150s, the Rams, the Silverados. These are the profit engines, the lifeblood of Detroit's bottom line. And they have basically zero market in Europe or Asia. But Canadians? They buy them in massive numbers. Canada is their only significant export market, period.
And listen, a Canadian consumer boycott isn't just some theory. It is a tested and devastatingly effective weapon. In the past, when there have been political tensions, an informal boycott of U.S. travel saw Canadian visits drop by up to 40%. And when the U.S. put tariffs on steel, Canadians organized a boycott on U.S. wine, and imports collapsed by a staggering 97% almost overnight. This is not a hollow threat.
But, okay, wielding this weapon isn't so simple, because this isn't just a fight between two countries. For the giant car companies caught in the middle of this storm, a trade war like this is basically a corporate civil war.
I mean, this creates a completely impossible situation. Just imagine. The CEO of Ford in Detroit might be quietly in favor of tariffs to bring production home to Michigan. But at the exact same time, the CEO of Ford Canada would be in Ottawa, lobbying the Prime Minister to hit back against his own U.S. headquarters to protect jobs in Ontario. The company would literally be at war with itself. And this whole mess also creates huge confusion for the very consumers Canada would need to get on board. A simple boycott USA message gets really complicated, really fast. So who do you boycott? Do you avoid the Toyota Tundra that's built in Texas, but then go buy the Toyota RAV4 that's built just down the road in Ontario? A blunt boycott could easily end up hurting the wrong factories, or even helping car makers that build completely outside of North America.
So all of this brings us to the final, really critical question. What happens if this high-stakes game of chicken actually goes off the cliff? What is the true cost of a full-blown trade war for everyone involved?
Well, for the United States, the cost to just replace the production it gets from Canada would be astronomical. We're talking building 5 or 6 brand new assembly plants. That's tens of billions of dollars right off the bat, and it would take at least 3 to 4 years to even get them running. But even then, the real challenge would be trying to replicate that incredibly specialized supplier network that took decades to build. The only thing you can be sure of? Higher car prices for American consumers.
And on the Canadian side, the stakes are even higher. Because the profit margins in this industry are so razor thin, even a small tariff isn't a compromise, it's a fatal blow. A deal that lands at, say, a 5% tariff might sound like some kind of political victory, but in reality, as one expert put it, it's a death sentence for Canadian assembly.
Let's just do the math for one company, Honda. A 5% tariff on the cars it exports from Canada would create an annual bill of over $500 million every single year. Now, if you're Honda and you're faced with that permanent $500 million a year cost, the decision becomes tragically simple. It's actually cheaper to just take that money, build a brand new factory in the US, and move all your production behind the tariff wall for good.
But maybe the biggest damage here goes way beyond just the auto industry. For decades, North America has been sold to the world as the most stable trading bloc on the planet. This kind of internal self-destructive fight, it's like watching a family have a brawl on their front lawn. It just signals profound instability. It tells global investors that this is no longer a safe bet for the next generation of investment in crucial tech like EVs and batteries.
And that really leaves us with one final, critical question to think about. This whole thing is a fight over the jobs and the factories of the combustion engine era. But while the US and Canada are busy threatening to blow up their own system, the real danger is that all the money and innovation for the next generation of vehicles just decides to flee the continent altogether, leaving both nations weaker while a more unified Asia or Europe races ahead. So, while North America fights over today's auto industry, who's going to win the industry of tomorrow?